Welcome everyone. We are live for our weekly connection, and as every week we're going to be talking about a health topic, anything that's coming up during the week, any questions that I'm getting. And this week certainly was the week all around epigenetic testing, and also what are the hot topics since 2020, like what is happening in the world of health since 2020. Has anything changed? What are we noticing? And so today I'm going to be sharing a little bit about what I see in the various test results from clients that I've been working with over the last few years as a consequence of 2020. And of course, there's always something going on in the world immunologically that is going to affect us. And as we already said last time, for those of you that do follow me, I talk a lot about endocrine health, neuroendocrine health, because the neuroendocrine system really is so crucial to our also immunological, hormonal health. It really touches everything. And at the same time, our hormonal household, or rather endocrine household, is very, very sensitive, especially the hypothalamus, pineal, pituitary gland. So whenever there's a big influx of emotion, stress, anything that really affects us in a big way, and that can be, of course, also from, happening in the collective, then we are going to feel it on an endocrine level. So we're going to be talking about epigenetic testing. And I see, hi Tamara, you are there. Epigenetic testing is one of those tests. I've had quite a few conversations in the last few days because we've had a big influx of tests coming in. There was a bit of a delay. And epigenetic test is one of those tests that really is kind of a nasty one, because the feedback, for the most part, not always of course, but for the most part, the feedback is not going to be as fantastic. Why? Because epigenetic test is, or the one that we use at least, is extremely sensitive. So it will pick up anything and everything that is happening in your system on a DNA level, on an epigenetic level. So it picks up whatever is being expressed currently in your DNA or at a DNA level. So it's not a blood test. Oftentimes it can look superficially good, and if you don't really know how to read between the lines, as you well know, a lot of doctors will send you off saying, everything looks great. Epigenetic testing is a little bit different, or very different, in that it is extremely sensitive, and it will pick up a lot of things, or rather it will pick up everything that is going on. And that's why a lot of times we don't like the results, because it picks up everything. At the same time, it can be tricky because for some people, when there's more neurological issues going on, oftentimes the test can look quite well when actually it's just a suppressed body that looks well. So, as with all testing, we need to be able to read the test and read in between the lines. Hi Tamara, yes. So if you have any questions, obviously, as always, you can put them forward here. What I wanted to address as far as epigenetics, and what we're definitely seeing, certainly with all of my clients that I've been seeing in the last few years, is that more and more people are having deep mitochondrial damage. And of course, we can ask ourselves, well, where is that coming from? What does it mean? Well, mitochondria, it's known as the powerhouse of the cell, even though, of course, the mitochondria is so much more than that. It's just kind of like that's, what everyone maybe remembers from early days science classes and biology. And so when we talk about mitochondrial health, we need to remember that whenever the mitochondria is affected by toxins, by pathogens, by anything that burdens the system, the mitochondria will also be affected. And as I always remind everyone, nothing ever lives in isolation. So we can never really say something is only going on in one particular area of the body. And that's kind of the one thing that I always drive home with our students, because it's so easy to think in body segments or in organs, or at the most in systems. But the reality is that even when we have, for example, bulging discs, or really something that seems to be more mechanical, or on a bone level, everything is always connected. So when you have a bulging disc, it's never just a localized issue. The reason why the disc slipped or is bulging is because there is systemic inflammation that typically has been going on for many, many years, and has now resulted in a mechanical problem. And most of these mechanical issues, as we said, they come from inflammatory conditions. But then where does the inflammation come from? Because we so often, everyone's always talking about calming down inflammation, addressing inflammation, but where does this inflammation come from? Or when we use something that suppresses inflammation, which, for example, even GLP-1s, they are celebrated as great agents to suppress inflammation, to help with inflammation. And a lot of people go, wow, the minute that I use a GLP-1, my inflammation is so much better. Great, can be helpful. But then we always need to look at, well, what is driving the inflammation, and are we fixing the problem, or are we just masking the problem? So similarly, when we talk mitochondrial health and what is driving mitochondrial damage, we always want to address the root cause of mitochondrial damage, because just to fix mitochondria, if we're not fixing the root cause, we're still going to go round and round in circles. And I would definitely say that that is what we do with a lot of health fixes or health hacks, right? We are suppressing things, we're addressing things on a superficial level, but so often we're not really addressing the root cause. And typically it's not just one root cause, right? Because even this idea of chasing the root cause, well, the reality is root causes for most of us, especially once we hit middle age, it's going to be pathogens for the vast majority of us. And when pathogenic load is, oftentimes even halfway silent, like lingering EVB or herpes virus, a lot of these viruses that a lot of us picked up when we were younger, and we kind of kicked them, but they're still lingering, smoldering underneath everything, oftentimes in biofilms. And that is what drives a lot of inflammatory condition. And then we kind of go and suppress inflammation with whatever we decide to suppress it with, whether it's curcumin or a GLP-1, we're still suppressing without addressing the actual root cause. And same thing really with toxins. We can suppress the inflammation that the toxins are causing, but the reality is at least every single, or I would say maybe not every single, but 98% of the epigenetic tests that I've been looking at over the last year, most of them have very high levels of glyphosate. Even people who eat 100% organic for several years, glyphosate level tend to be very high, and forever toxins. So those are things that are going to definitely continuously damage the mitochondria. And then on top of the toxins that definitely are not getting better nowhere in the world, we then have this pathogenic burden post 2020. And then, we can get into sort of the conspiracy theories there, but that's not really my interest. There's a question, what changes have you seen in hormones post 2020? So definitely post 2020, and is it a coincidence? Is it just that I'm attracting more women in perimenopause and menopause? Who knows? But what I'm seeing more than ever before is huge hormonal imbalances. And then there we also need to ask ourselves, well, what is the driving factor? Because when we listen to, most hormonal experts, they always only talk about estrogen being deficient and replacing estrogen, or at the most we talk a little bit about testosterone, and then some also bring in progesterone, and that's all wonderful and relevant. But ultimately, we need to ask ourselves, what is driving, and no, it is not just perimenopause or menopause, what is driving the big hormonal shitstorm that so many of us face in perimenopause or at the latest in menopause? And I would say from what I'm seeing is that it's not just the hormonal fluctuations or hormones that are missing and diminishing, which is a natural process that has always happened, but rather it's everything that is going on underneath the hormonal household. What is driving the hormonal household, which is the hypothalamus pituitary pineal gland, so it's the HPP axis, and of course also the adrenals and everything that's going on or not happening with liver health and with immune health. So we can definitely say that when we have a weakened immune system, when we have even more so a weak HPP axis, so when the hypothalamus pituitary pineal gland has been impacted, disrupted, and this can also happen for very young women, we're going to see hormonal imbalances. And simply giving someone hormones, which of course, is all the rage nowadays, and it's not that I'm against giving hormones, because there's a time and place for really everything in some cases, but rather than going straight to hormones, we want to take a step back and look from above, look at the full picture and understand what is driving the hormonal chaos. And it's not just as simple as, so-and-so is in perimenopause and that is why hormones are diminishing and therefore we need to substitute. Because, my whole point is, and this is my personal experience, but also my experience with so many of my clients, is that the minute that we address the HPP axis with pituitary and hypothalamic peptides, and sometimes some glandular support for a short while just to kind of support the system, we see the resolution literally of 95% of hormonal issues, at least on surface level. Then yes, we can have a conversation around how substituting hormones at some point is going to benefit us in terms of anti-aging and all of that. Yes, that can be a valid point. But in terms of taking away symptoms, most of the symptoms are going to be taken away by addressing the HPP axis, and then kind of very close behind is addressing liver detoxification in a big way. And ultimately nowadays, what we're seeing is, of course, huge burden on the liver. So BPA, plastics, and glyphosates, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And to me, what's shocking is that, this also happens for people that, like I said, have absolutely and strictly been eating organic for the last, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So that kind of shows us, sure, we can say, potentially the toxins are from before. And yet what I'm also seeing, and this, I would say, is that, due to 2020 or not, who knows? I think there's a lot of unknown. Bottom line is what we're seeing more and more is a crazy increase in toxins, even though people are detoxing, or certainly most of the clients that are coming to me, they're doing some level of detoxification and have been doing. They are doing a lot of things, and yet somehow we're chasing our tails. And I would say this happens to so many of us. And I think also a lot of people out there that are claiming, because of course social media, as we know, there's a lot of great claims, but then what is really happening underneath is a whole different story. And so definitely what I'm seeing, and it's not because it's anyone's fault, it's not because we are failing or we're doing things wrong. I think that oftentimes the impact, the environmental impact, and again, it's not just toxins, but I do believe a big part is also just the collective sentiment, which, I mean, without thinking that this is woo-woo, we are all somehow interconnected, and also the collective sentiment, we're all part of it, whether we like it or not. We're exposed to it, we feel it. I certainly, even with all of my strong meditation practices and all of that, the time post 2020 has been probably one of my toughest ever, really, from a mental, emotional, spiritual perspective. And I thought that I had gone through tough times, and this was like a whole other level. And I know that other people that have dared to speak about it, rather than always kind of claiming pure centeredness, I've heard other people say the same. What do I think are the biggest challenges to achieving health post 2020? Yeah, I mean, this, I think, is a huge conversation that, again, needs to be had, because on social media, everything always seems like, we just do 1, 2, 3, and we do peptides, and we do whatever, insert the blank, whatever it is, that, that is going to resolve everything. And I would say, from my personal experience, but also from what I'm seeing with clients, is that, and again, is it post 2020? Is it just a coincidence? Who knows? But what I'm seeing is that it takes way more. Maybe it's also as we get older. 5 years ago, I was 5 years younger, and, just entering perimenopause. So it can be, again, a lot of different variables. And I do think that once hormones change, it's a whole different ball game. And from where I stand now, so this is kind of not, strictly speaking 2020 related, but from where I stand now, I would say if your hormones haven't changed yet, and you're not kind of in your perimenopausal hormonal mess, then you can't speak. You can't speak about what happens afterwards, because I used to think, that I'm going to escape all of it because I was living so healthily, etc., etc. But the reality is that once our hormones change, it's almost like the curtain is being pulled back on everything that has been kind of kept okay through hormones. Now, of course, the hormone substitute replacement people, will say, oh, well, you see, just replace hormones. And my argument is, it's not just replace hormones or don't replace hormones, but it's address what is underneath the hormonal sort of shit show, and then maybe also replace the hormones. But back to how are we to address health issues differently post 2020? I mean, I think certainly one big thing is we need to look at with much more effort towards our immune system, because that's another thing epigenetic testing is showing, is a lot of immune weakness. Now again, do we know exactly if that's just post 2020 or not? Was that before and we just didn't have the means to really test it with as much precision? Who knows? But certainly what I'm seeing is way more immune deficiency, immune weakness. And what to me is really shocking is to see this in people that are doing a lot for their health. And of course, we're not testing everyone. In fact, there's certain people that I would love to test and to see, well, let's see what your epigenetic test looks like. Because I would say, from everything that I've seen, we can have great bloods, we can sometimes even certainly we can have amazing genetics, I've seen that, and that doesn't always mean, of course, that you're going to have great epigenetics, because epigenetics matter more. but especially in today's climate where we're simply and realistically being attacked from all angles. And I'm not a dooms and glooms person. I always feel that we have so much agency. The power is definitely in our hands. But if we stick our head in the sand and kind of go, oh, well, it's all, BS, and I don't believe in conspiracy theories, which I actually don't even personally know if I do. All I know is I look at test results and I look at what's happening for people. And I know that a lot of people are putting huge effort into their health, and yet there's still things that are not, quite matching up. That is because we live in a completely different immunological picture than certainly we used to, and I would say, is that just 2020? I think it's everything. So what is the best strategy for addressing health issues post-2020? I would say don't stick your head in the sand. Number one is really be willing to test. And it's not, I'm not for over-testing for sure. And I think there's a lot of tests that are completely unnecessary, but maybe once a year, do some in-depth testing, or especially if you are at a point where you've done a lot of things and you're thinking to yourself, why is something not working? Why am I still not where I should be, right? My diet is pristine, I'm detoxing or fasting regularly, like I'm doing all the kind of things, right, that we know to do. I'm exercising, I'm refeeding correctly, because we know fasting is not everything, detoxing is not everything. So if you're someone who's sort of aware, you've got your knowledge, you've got your understanding, and you're still stuck, that's where definitely I would say either epigenetic testing. Well, the reason why I like epigenetic testing so much currently, and is nothing better at this very moment, but of course always evolving, is that the epigenetic test really gives you a very comprehensive picture in terms of what's happening with your immune system, what's happening in terms of brain inflammation, what's happening on a mitochondrial level, what's happening with toxins. So you get a very good idea as to where the potential or where the actual bottleneck is. Because sometimes we can say, oh, well, I need to detox more. And oftentimes, epigenetically, we see, no, actually, detox is not really the problem. The problem is mitochondrial, or there's immune weakness, or there's, more hormonal stuff going on. So depending on the bottleneck, then obviously taking correct action is way easier. And another big thing I think in today's world is to simply be aware that, again, especially after so-called middle age, we're going to have to take massive action if we want to experience exceptional health. Because normal is, to get to 50, 60 and over, and to start having simply more and more health issues. But if we want to be 50, 60, 70, 80 and be truly in exceptional health, and I think now and going forward ever more, we're going to have to take massive action. And at the same time, it also then depends on your genetics. For example, when I look at my genetic profile and unfortunately my epigenetic history, I've definitely I have a lot of odds stacked against me, but still this doesn't mean anything. I only started when I was 41 to really kind of make some massive changes and to really wake up. So point is, it's never too late, and I have clients who've started even later. In fact, one of my favorite stories is the mother of one of our students, who is now I think 85 and looks like a movie star. When she was in a wheelchair, not able to walk from vaccine injury, not the vaccine, other vaccine injuries, with massive health impairments. And so whenever I kind of even, am tempted to think for a second, oh, I'm a bit doomed, then I remember her and I go, no, there's no such thing. Because if that woman was able to, so radically turn things around for herself, I can guarantee it, none of us are doomed. But it definitely takes, I think, more action than we think it does. And in some ways that's humbling, but I also, I feel if we're not real about that, then what's the point? And I do think that today on social media, so many people just make it sound as if like, oh, just do a little bit of this and do a little bit of that, and it's so easy. Well, epigenetic testing doesn't reflect that. So that's the thing. If it were so easy, and as 1, 2, 3, as do a little bit of NAD and do a little bit of ice plunging and, eat enough protein, we wouldn't see the kind of epigenetic results that we are seeing. So it definitely takes more strategy. And when you have that mind switch where you kind of go, humble yourself a little bit and be willing to look at where the actual bottlenecks are and then take action, and maybe listen a little bit less to those people that make it seem so simple, because it's not. So many of us were cut off from community in 2020 and following. We need to find a whole new way of living in society. Our bodies will continue breaking down. Absolutely. I do agree. Yeah, I mean, that's for sure. I know for myself that I always thought of myself as a super resilient person, and also resourceful in terms of my connection, to whatever you want to call it, God, spirit. And never have I been tested as I was tested post 2020. And it was actually shocking to me, because it was like, come on, I've been through so many tough times. And I couldn't quite understand. But that, to me, the only explanation was that was the collective sentiment that I thought I could disentangle myself from, but I couldn't. I was in it. I was feeling it. And I had to do way more work than ever before on myself. And, sure, always in hindsight, it's like, oh, great, fabulous, thanks for the lesson. But while I was in it, not so fun. What testing are you using with your clients to figure out where the weaknesses are? Yeah, I would say, look, a good blood panel, or rather a full blood panel read well, can already give a lot of clues. And of course, in the academy, we teach you how to read in between the lines, because so many clients, it's the famous story that we always hear on social media: your bloods, look great and normal, and yet, you're not feeling normal. Yes, all the time. And it's also very easy to not see certain things, right? Because on surface, it's easy to kind of go, these levels are normal, it looks good. So it takes a lot of attention to detail. And I know that it's very easy, because having worked myself with, mentors and coaches, it's not that easy to find someone who takes enough time, because it takes time and dedication to really go everything with a fine-tooth comb. So a good blood panel can definitely reveal a lot. Personally, these days, I find the most revealing test, like I said, is the epigenetic test. I love the advanced genomics to give a blueprint, but that doesn't tell us what is going on currently in the body. And at the same time, oftentimes without the advanced genomic blueprint, without knowing where are your weaknesses, especially with certain genetic polymorphisms, we know that not knowing what's going on can be super detrimental and also very confusing. And, unfortunately, this is where guessing isn't really going to cut it, because, there's too much potential guesswork to be done. So I would definitely say the epigenetic test is probably the one that's going to give you the most detailed picture to understand where the actual bottleneck is. And then sometimes, not always, we're going to have to do a GI test. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of GI testing. I do probably very rarely GI testing, because in most cases we can figure things out without it. But then every now and again, when we get to these points where it's like, okay, we've done all the things, we've done addressing pathogens and even stealth infections and so forth, and maybe we're still not hitting it, that's when I would say, definitely we need to do a little bit more testing. But yeah, any other questions? Otherwise, we are going to leave it here for today. And earlier I thought of a really great topic for next week, but now I can't remember it. Have you changed your recommendations for ideal diet as a result of 2020? Well, I wouldn't say as a result of 2020. I would say that I've changed my recommendations for an ideal diet from the perspective of understanding genomics, and also from the perspective of understanding from my own experience, but also, studying since 2020 with various masters, if you will, or, teachers, that one diet is never going to cut it for life for anyone. And so even though I used to believe that one diet, or even that there is one diet that's going to work for life, for someone, I would say, and even just logically, when we think of how we evolved, right, no matter which kind of preference we have, and of course I used to prefer a high raw food diet, fruit for the most part, and I still do fruit fasting on a regular basis, but now I've included other foods. Why? Because once I understood my genomic profile, it was like, well, actually fruit alone is not really going to cut it. And I would dare to say that fruit alone is not going to cut it for most people, and there's many different reasons for that. But ultimately, what I would say is that when we take a moment to just reconnect to how we evolved, right? How would we live if we were to live naturally and we had to fend for ourselves in our original environment? So, for example, we moved to Bali 5 years ago, and it was one of those, it should have stayed a fantasy. It was a beautiful adventure and all the things, but in some ways, for so many reasons, right? One of those stories where hindsight is 2020, but looking back, this environment, I don't come from the tropics. I come from sort of the northern European hemisphere, and I've really reconnected to how deeply my body loves cold weather. Not all the time, but cold water, it thrives in challenging weather. Actually, I've really had to admit that. And so this whole tropical and always warm, my body just completely doesn't like it. And likewise, eating tropical fruits in the tropics, my body just completely didn't like that. And in some ways, also a beautiful kind of humbling homecoming to, my roots. And so even though my roots are in Northern Europe, going back to South Africa, where I spent really most of my life, it's like, oh my gosh, happy homecoming, because cold water and very European food and so forth. So I think food-wise, it really is about letting go of all fantasies and allowing the body to direct us. And personally, I find when I really listen to my body has certain rhythms. So it loves the fruit, it loves vegetables, but it then also needs starches and it also needs proteins. And why? Because density, there's something about density. Just as we need lightness, we also need density. So, that could be like a whole other life. But for me personally, letting go of all food dogmas and really understanding that different bodies thrives on slightly different diets, but that fundamentally we all need variety. And then some people thrive on a little bit more starches, and some people thrive on a little bit more fats and so forth, and some higher protein, lower protein for sure. But ultimately, we all need variety. And I don't think that, really there is one diet for all for life, but that we should be cycling, really alternating and listening to our body. Okay, well, thank you for joining me here, and I'll think of the amazing topic that I was thinking for next week, and we'll see you next week. Bye, everyone.